I was sitting at my desk, neck deep in code, when my screen went black. Not the usual Windows is updating black, the something catastrophic just happened black. My internet connection had vanished without warning, cutting me off mid-commit to the company repository. The timing couldn't have been worse. I had a deadline in 3 hours, and the CEO was waiting for my implementation of a feature that would make or break our next investor meeting. "What the hell?" I muttered, checking the modem, the router, and all the connections. Everything seemed fine on my end. I called my internet service provider, but they could only confirm an interruption on my line. They'd send a technician tomorrow, useless for my immediate crisis. I'm Frank Tanner, a senior software developer at Nexus Technologies. Working remotely from my home in Maple Grove, a suburb of Minneapolis, Minnesota, had been ideal until today. I'd moved into Maple Ridge Estates 6 months ago, drawn by the well-maintained neighborhood and proximity to parks. The homeowners association had seemed like a minor inconvenience at the time, just some rules about lawn maintenance and exterior paint colors. Nothing that would impact my livelihood. I stepped outside to check the connection box at the side of my house and froze. The protective cover was open, and the fiber optic cable had been cleanly cut. This wasn't an accident or weather damage. Someone had deliberately severed my connection. As I stood there, bewildered, I noticed Deborah Patterson, the HOA president, watching me from her driveway across the street. She was in her mid-50s, with a perfect blonde bob and that perpetually pursed expression that screamed, "I'd like to speak to your manager." When she saw me looking, she marched over, clipboard in hand. "Mr. Tanner," she said, her voice artificially sweet. "I see you've discovered the issue with your internet situation." "My situation? Someone cut my fiber line. Do you know anything about this?" Deborah's smile tightened. "The HOA board voted unanimously last night. Your exterior cable installation violates Section 7.3 of the covenant. We sent you 3 notices." I vaguely remembered receiving some mail from the HOA that I'd set aside to deal with later. Working 70-hour weeks on a major software release hadn't left me much time for homeowner paperwork. You can't just cut someone's internet connection. I work from home. "This is my livelihood. The rules apply to everyone, Mr. Tanner. The cable was installed incorrectly. It's visible from the street. The covenant clearly states all utility connections must be concealed or properly channeled through approved conduits." I took a deep breath, trying to remain calm. "So instead of giving me a reasonable chance to fix it, you just cut the line. Do you have any idea what you've done? I have deliverables due today that impact a company with over 200 employees." "That sounds like a personal problem," Deborah replied, making a note on her clipboard. "You have 30 days to reinstall the connection according to HOA specifications. The approved contractors are listed in the community directory." As she walked away, I called after her, "This is illegal. You can't just destroy someone's property." Deborah didn't even turn around. "It's all in the covenant you signed, Mr. Tanner. Perhaps you should have read it more carefully." I stood there, dumbfounded, staring at the severed cable. My phone buzzed with a text from my boss asking about the status of my work. I needed to fix this fast. I called my friend Tyler, who worked at a different ISP. "Hey Ty, I've got an emergency. The HOA cut my fiber line. I need to get back online today somehow." "They did what?" Tyler sounded shocked. "That's completely illegal, man, but let me see what I can do. I know a guy who might be able to come out today, but it won't be cheap. I don't care about the cost. I need internet access now." While waiting for Tyler's contact to arrive, I drove to the nearest coffee shop with Wi-Fi and frantically worked to meet my deadline. The crowded space was hardly conducive to complex coding, but I didn't have a choice. I messaged my team to explain the situation, earning sympathetic responses and one comment that stood out. "Document everything. You've got grounds for a serious lawsuit." The emergency technician, Rahman, arrived at my house late that afternoon and whistled when he saw the clean cut. Someone knew what they were doing. They cut it in a way that makes repair more difficult. He worked quickly, splicing the line and creating a temporary fix. "This will get you online, but you'll need a proper reinstall, and I'd secure this box with a lock. These HOA types sometimes get persistent." 3 hours and $600 later, I was back online at home. I finished my work and made my deadline, but the stress had been immense, and I was furious. Who did Deborah Patterson think she was? I decided to look deeper into exactly what had happened. The next morning, I reviewed the HOA covenant I'd hastily signed when buying the house. There was indeed a section about utility installations, but it was vague at best. It specified that connections should be aesthetically integrated, but said nothing about the HOA's right to modify, remove, or damage a homeowner's utilities. I checked my email and found the notices. Deborah mentioned 3 formal warnings buried among promotional emails and work messages. The first was from 2 months ago, the most recent from last week. They cited the violation but never mentioned any plan to cut the line. They only threatened fines. I took photos of the damaged cable, the repair work, the connection box, and the street view of my house. From the main road, you could barely see the cable. It followed the roof line and was the same color as my siding. This wasn't about aesthetics, this felt personal. My doorbell rang around noon. I opened it to find Tiffany Torres, another HOA board member, with a folder of papers. "Frank, I wanted to apologize for the abrupt handling of your cable situation." Tiffany was in her 40s, more softly spoken than Deborah, but clearly uncomfortable. "I voted for giving you more time, but I was outvoted." "You were part of this decision?" I asked, trying to keep my voice level. She nodded reluctantly. "The board was split. Deborah pushed hard for immediate action, something about setting an example." "An example?" "I'm going to be setting an example, all right, of what happens when an HOA illegally damages private property. Do you realize what you've done? I'm a software developer. My internet connection isn't just for Netflix, it's essential infrastructure for my job." Tiffany had the decency to look embarrassed. "I understand that now. That's partly why I'm here. The board has scheduled an emergency meeting tonight to discuss your situation. I thought you might want to attend." "I'll be there," I said, accepting the meeting notice. "And Tiffany, you might want to consult with the HOA's legal counsel before then. What Deborah did wasn't just unfriendly, it was illegal." After Tiffany left, I called my cousin Jason, who happened to be an attorney specializing in property law. I explained the situation, and he was incredulous. "Frank, they committed criminal damage to property, trespassing, and potentially tortious interference with business. This is serious. Most states have laws protecting utility connections, including internet service. The fact that you work from home and they knew, it makes this worse." "How much income did you lose from this?" "I managed to meet my deadline, but I had to pay for emergency repairs and lost about 5 hours of productive work time. Plus, the stress nearly gave me an ulcer." "Document everything: receipts, emails, the timeline of events. Take photos of everything." "I'll draft a demand letter immediately." "Do you have HOA board insurance information?" "I can get it," I said, feeling a surge of determination. "What should I ask for in compensation?" "Let me think," Jason replied. "Emergency repair costs, lost wages, costs for temporary workspace, emotional distress, and punitive damages for the willful nature of their actions." I'd start with a demand of $80,000. $80,000, I almost choked. "Isn't that excessive?" "Not at all. This is egregious conduct. They deliberately cut off your livelihood. Courts take that seriously. Plus, the threat of a significant judgment might make them come to their senses quickly." That evening, I arrived at the community center for the HOA emergency meeting, armed with photos, receipts, and a growing sense of outrage. About 20 homeowners were present, along with the 5-member board seated at a table at the front. Deborah presided, looking unruffled and self-important. "Item 1 on our agenda," she began, "is the cable installation violation at 487 Oakwood Drive. Mr. Tanner is present to discuss the board's enforcement action." I stood, addressing the room rather than just the board. Yesterday, without proper notice or legal authority, someone from this HOA cut the fiber optic cable that provides internet to my home. I'm a senior software developer who works remotely. This action not only damaged my property but jeopardized my employment and caused significant financial harm. Several homeowners looked shocked. An older gentleman raised his hand. "Deborah, you said you were just going to issue another fine." When did cutting cables become HOA policy? Deborah's composure slipped slightly. The board voted to take corrective action after multiple violations remained unaddressed. Mr. Tanner ignored 3 notices. "That's not accurate," I countered. "The notices mentioned fines, not destruction of property. And regardless, the HOA has no legal right to damage utilities. I've consulted with an attorney who specializes in property law. He's preparing a demand letter for $80,000 in damages." The room erupted in murmurs. Deborah banged her gavel. "That's preposterous. The covenant gives us enforcement authority, not to commit criminal damage to property," I replied evenly. "My attorney will also be contacting the county prosecutor to discuss potential criminal charges for whoever physically cut the line." The meeting devolved into chaos. Board member Greg Williams, a retired judge, asked to see my documentation. After reviewing it, he pulled Deborah and the other board members into a huddle. When they returned, Greg addressed the room. "The board needs to consult with our legal counsel before proceeding further. We're adjourning this meeting until next week." As people filed out, several neighbors approached me. Martin Chen, who lived 2 doors down, shook my hand. "About time someone stood up to her. Deborah's been getting more extreme with enforcement. Last month she had someone's rose bushes removed while they were on vacation because they were 6 inches too tall." "This isn't my first HOA," I told him, "but it's certainly the most aggressive I've encountered." "Do you know who actually cut my cable?" Martin looked uncomfortable. "Deborah's son-in-law, Kyle. He does maintenance for the HOA. He was bragging about it at the coffee shop this morning." The next day, I received a call from Gregory Sterling, the HOA's attorney. His tone was conciliatory but cautious. "Mr. Tanner, I've reviewed the incident involving your internet connection. The board's action exceeded their authority under both the covenant and state law. I've advised them of this." "I appreciate the acknowledgement," I replied, "but acknowledgement doesn't fix the damage done or the income I nearly lost." "I understand. The board is prepared to cover your repair costs and offer a 6-month waiver of HOA fees as compensation." I almost laughed. "My attorney is preparing a demand letter for $80,000, Mr. Sterling. The board's unauthorized actions constituted criminal damage to property and tortious interference with business. Given that I work in software development and rely on my internet connection for my livelihood, the potential damages are substantial." There was a long pause. "That figure seems excessive, does it? The emergency repair alone cost $600. I had to scramble to find alternative workspace to meet critical deadlines. The stress impact was significant. And most importantly, this was a deliberate act, not an accident. Punitive damages in such cases can be substantial." Sterling cleared his throat. "Let me speak with the board again. I'm sure we can find a reasonable resolution without involving the courts." 2 days later, Jason completed the demand letter, which I hand-delivered to each board member. The letter outlined in excruciating legal detail how the HOA had violated Minnesota statutes, HOA regulations, and basic property rights. It demanded $80,000 in compensation and included the threat of criminal charges against the individuals who had physically cut the cable. The response was swift. That evening, Deborah Patterson and 2 other board members appeared at my door, along with Mr. Sterling. "This is outrageous," Deborah began, waving the letter. "You're trying to bankrupt our HOA over a simple covenant enforcement." I remained calm. There was nothing simple about cutting my internet connection. That was a deliberate act of sabotage that nearly cost me my job. Sterling placed a restraining hand on Deborah's arm. "We'd like to discuss a settlement, Mr. Tanner. The board is prepared to offer $5,000 to cover your costs and inconvenience." "That's nowhere near adequate," I replied. "I've already filed a police report for criminal damage to property." Detective Larson seemed very interested in the case, especially when I mentioned there was a witness who heard Kyle Matthews bragging about cutting the cable. Deborah's face went pale. Kyle was her son-in-law. That's hearsay. "Perhaps," I acknowledged, "but there's also the security camera footage from my neighbor's house that shows Kyle approaching my connection box with tools. I obtained a copy this morning." This was a bluff. I hadn't actually secured such footage, but the panic on Deborah's face told me I'd struck gold. Sterling looked between us. "I think we should continue this conversation in a more formal setting. Mr. Tanner, would you and your attorney be available tomorrow morning at my office?" The next day, Jason and I sat across from Sterling, Deborah, and Greg Williams in the attorney's office. The tension was palpable. "After further consideration," Sterling began, "the board is prepared to offer $25,000 to settle this matter completely with no admission of wrongdoing." Jason shook his head. "That's insufficient given the circumstances. My client's demand is $80,000, which includes compensatory and punitive damages. The deliberate nature of this act, targeting my client's professional livelihood, justifies the figure." Deborah couldn't contain herself. "This is extortion. The cable was installed improperly. We were enforcing the rules." "By committing a crime," Jason replied evenly. "Minnesota Statute 609.595 classifies intentional damage to another's property as criminal damage. The value of the damaged property determines the severity, but the potential disruption to my client's employment escalates the seriousness significantly." Sterling looked uncomfortable. "We should discuss the matter privately, Deborah." While they conferred in the hallway, Jason whispered to me, "They're getting nervous. The HOA insurance probably covers negligence but not intentional acts. If Kyle admitted to doing this on Deborah's instructions, they could both face personal liability." When they returned, Sterling's expression was grim. "We can offer $40,000 with a confidentiality agreement. That's our final offer." Jason and I exchanged glances. "We can settle for $60,000, I countered, "with the condition that Deborah Patterson resigns from the HOA board immediately." "That's absurd," Deborah sputtered. Greg Williams, who had been silent until now, turned to her. "Deborah, you told the board you had legal clearance for this action. You said our attorney had reviewed and approved it. Sterling just confirmed that never happened." Deborah's face flushed. I thought it was clearly within our rights." "It wasn't," Sterling said firmly. "And now the HOA faces significant liability because of your unilateral decision." The negotiation continued for another hour. Finally, we reached an agreement. $55,000 in damages, a formal apology from the HOA, Deborah's immediate resignation from the board, and mandatory HOA board training on the legal limits of their authority. As we were leaving, Greg pulled me aside. "For what it's worth, I'm sorry this happened. Deborah's been using the HOA to settle personal vendettas for years. This isn't the first incident, just the most expensive one." "Personal vendetta? What did I ever do to her?" Greg looked uncomfortable. "Your home office faces her house. She complained at several meetings that she didn't like seeing you always at home, never going to work like normal people. She called it lowering property values by making the neighborhood look unemployed." I was speechless. My decision to work from home, an arrangement that had been approved by my employer, and that had become increasingly common post-pandemic, had somehow personally offended Deborah's sensibilities about what a neighborhood should look like. Over the next week, the settlement was formalized. The HOA's insurance covered $40,000 of the payment, while Deborah was personally responsible for the remaining $15,000. Kyle Matthews received a citation for criminal damage to property. though the prosecutor agreed to a diversion program since it was his first offense. The most satisfying moment came at the next HOA meeting, where Greg Williams, now the interim president, read a formal apology to me in front of the entire neighborhood. Deborah wasn't present, having already listed her house for sale. The actions taken against Mr. Tanner's internet connection were unauthorized, illegal, and completely contrary to the purpose of our homeowners association. Greg read. We are implementing new procedures to ensure such overreach never happens again, including legal review of all enforcement actions and a homeowner appeals process. After the meeting, several neighbors approached me to express their support. Many shared their own stories of run-ins with Deborah's rigid and often arbitrary enforcement. She threatened to fine me for having a bird feeder, said Alina Johnson, an elderly resident. Said it was an unauthorized structure. I've lived here 20 years, had that feeder the whole time. Martin Chen, who had first told me about Kyle's involvement, invited me to join a newly formed homeowner advocacy group within the HOA. We need people who understand the actual limits of HOA power, he explained. Your experience could help prevent similar situations. I agreed to participate. While the settlement compensated me for the damage, the real victory was exposing the abuse of power that had been allowed to fester. 3 months later, I sat in my home office, completing a major software project without interruption. My internet connection was now properly installed in a conduit that met HOA specifications, though I'd also added a security camera and reinforced lock on the connection box. My phone rang. It was Tiffany Torres, who had become the new HOA president after Greg declined to continue beyond his interim role. Frank, I wanted to update you on our progress, she began. We've completely revised the covenant enforcement procedures. All complaints now require photographic evidence. Homeowners get 60 days to address issues, and any action beyond a written notice requires board approval and legal review. That sounds like a significant improvement, I acknowledged. It is. And we've started a neighborhood technology committee to update our approaches to modern work from home situations. We'd love your input, given your expertise. I found myself agreeing to help. Despite the nightmare I'd experienced, I still believed in the concept of neighbors working together to maintain community standards, just with proper boundaries and respect for individual rights. As I hung up, my email pinged with a message from Jason. He just learned that Deborah Patterson had attempted to join another HOA board in a neighboring town, only to be rejected when a background check revealed the incident at Maple Ridge Estates. Sometimes, justice comes in unexpected forms. The settlement money allowed me to upgrade my home office substantially. I invested in a backup internet connection through a different provider, ensuring I'd never be completely offline again. I also took a long, overdue vacation, something I'd been putting off due to work pressures. When I returned, I found that the atmosphere in the neighborhood had changed dramatically. People were friendlier, more willing to talk about issues instead of immediately filing complaints. The quarterly HOA meetings, once dreaded affairs dominated by Deborah's stern pronouncements, had become collaborative discussions about genuine community improvements. One evening, as I worked late on a critical project, there was a knock at my door. It was Martin, looking concerned. Frank, I thought you should know. Kyle Matthews was just at the cul-de-sac taking photos of houses. He drove off when I approached him. I frowned. Thanks for letting me know. Have you told Tiffany? Heading there next. Just wanted to make sure you were aware, given your history. After Martin left, I checked my security cameras. Sure enough, Kyle's distinctive red pickup had driven slowly past my house twice in the last hour. I called Detective Larson, who had handled the original case. It's probably nothing, he assured me, but given the history, I'll have a patrol car swing by, and I'll have a word with Mr. Matthews about harassment. The next morning, Tiffany called an emergency board meeting. Kyle Matthews has been documented photographing at least 12 properties in our neighborhood, she explained to the assembled homeowners. He's been contracted by a rival HOA to document successful enforcement methods. Apparently, Deborah has been consulting with them. I couldn't help but laugh at the absurdity. So she's trying to export her style of HOA management, even after it cost her $15,000 personally? Some people never learn, Greg Williams remarked, but we have. I've drafted a formal cease and desist letter to both Kyle and the other HOA, warning them against trespassing or harassment of our residents. The incident prompted the board to implement yet another reform. A strict policy against sharing homeowner information or property details with outside entities without explicit consent. 6 months after the cable cutting incident, I received a surprising email from Tiffany. The board had voted unanimously to offer me a position as their technology advisor, a newly created role to help modernize the HOA's operations and communications. The irony wasn't lost on me from HOA target to HOA consultant in less than a year. I accepted the position, on the condition that my first project would be creating a transparent online system for covenant enforcement. Each complaint would be publicly trackable, with clear documentation of the violation, response timeframes, and appeal options. No more secretive enforcement or surprise actions. That's exactly what we had in mind, Tiffany confirmed. We want to be the most transparent HOA in the state. Working on the system gave me an unexpected sense of purpose. My software development skills, which had nearly been sabotaged by HOA overreach, were now being used to prevent similar abuses. The new system launched 3 months later to overwhelmingly positive feedback from homeowners. I never thought I'd say this, Alina Johnson told me at the launch presentation, but I'm actually proud of our HOA now. For the first time in years, it feels like they're working for us, not against us. 1 year after the incident, the transformation of Maple Ridge Estates was remarkable. Property values had increased as the HOA focused on genuine improvements rather than petty enforcement. The community had invested in a shared workspace facility for residents who worked remotely, with high-speed internet redundancy that I had helped design. I occasionally received updates about Deborah. She had moved to a non-HOA neighborhood after multiple associations rejected her applications. Kyle had found work with a legitimate landscape company after his brief attempt at HOA enforcement consulting failed spectacularly. The settlement money had long since been spent, partly on my home improvements and partly on a coding bootcamp scholarship I established for disadvantaged youth in Minneapolis. The experience had taught me that sometimes standing up against unreasonable authority isn't just about personal vindication, it's about creating systemic change. My internet connection never went down again. The new installation was a model of efficiency and aesthetic integration, so much so that the HOA began using photos of it in their guidelines as an example of proper utility placement. The security camera on my connection box remained, though some lessons you don't forget. The final chapter of this saga came 18 months after the incident, when a reporter from the Minneapolis Star-Tribune contacted me about a feature story on HOA reform. Apparently, our experience had inspired similar challenges to HOA overreach throughout the state, leading to proposed legislation establishing clearer boundaries for association authority. Your case has become something of a benchmark, the reporter explained. It demonstrated both the potential for abuse and the path to reform. Would you be willing to share your perspective? I agreed, and the resulting article, How One Cut Cable Led to HOA Revolution, sparked a broader conversation about homeowner rights versus community standards. I received emails from people across the country dealing with similar issues, seeking advice on how to challenge unreasonable HOA actions. In response, I created a simple website documenting my experience and providing resources for others. It wasn't meant to encourage litigation, but rather to educate homeowners about their rights and associations about their limitations. The site included templates for addressing HOA overreach and guidelines for collaborative resolution. 2 years after Deborah Patterson had my internet cable cut, I stood before the Minnesota State Legislature's Housing Committee, testifying in support of the Homeowner Protection Act. The proposed law would establish clear limitations on HOA enforcement actions, require due process before penalties could be imposed, and specifically prohibit associations from interfering with utility services without court approval. What happened to me was extreme, I told the committee, but it wasn't unique. Across the state, homeowners have faced similar overreach, from unauthorized removal of solar panels to interference with disability accommodations. These aren't just inconveniences, they affect people's livelihoods and quality of life. The bill passed with bipartisan support, and Governor Anderson signed it into law 3 months later. At the signing ceremony, I stood alongside other homeowners whose stories had contributed to the reform effort. What had begun as a personal battle had evolved into meaningful change that would protect thousands of Minnesotans. Back in Maple Ridge Estates, our HOA had become a model for others. Tiffany Torres was regularly invited to speak at regional conferences about association reform and homeowner engagement. Our online enforcement tracking system had been adopted by dozens of other communities, and complaints of HOA overreach had plummeted statewide. My career had evolved as well. While I still worked as a software developer, I'd added consulting on community technology systems to my portfolio. Several municipalities had hired me to create transparent tracking systems for building code enforcement and permit applications, inspired by what we'd built for our HOA. 3 years after the incident, I received an unexpected letter. It was from Deborah Patterson. I almost threw it away unopened, but curiosity got the better of me. "Mr. Tanner," she wrote, "I have spent considerable time reflecting on my actions as HOA president. While I still believe strongly in maintaining community standards, I recognize that my methods were inappropriate and harmful. The cable cutting incident was inexcusable, and I am truly sorry for the distress it caused you. I have enclosed a book on collaborative leadership that has helped me understand where I went wrong. I don't expect forgiveness, but I wanted you to know that your stand against my actions has led to my own growth." I was skeptical at first, but further investigation revealed that Deborah had indeed transformed. She was now working with a nonprofit that mediated disputes between homeowners and associations, using her experience as a cautionary tale in training sessions. Life in Maple Ridge Estates continued to improve. The HOA focused on enhancing community amenities rather than policing minutiae. We'd added a community garden, upgraded the playground, and established a neighborhood emergency response team. Quarterly social events helped neighbors connect as people rather than just adjacent property owners. My home office remained my primary workspace, though I now occasionally used the community workspace for collaborative projects. The view from my window, the one that had so offended Deborah's sensibilities about what a proper neighborhood should look like, now included a thriving front yard garden that had won recognition in the community's beautification program. 4 years after my internet cable was cut, I found myself in an unexpected position. I was nominated to serve as president of the Maple Ridge Estates HOA. My initial reaction was to laugh at the irony, but after consideration, I accepted the nomination. At my first meeting as president, I reflected on the journey. 4 years ago, I was fighting this association over a severed internet cable. Today, I'm leading it. That transformation wasn't just about me or even about a single incident. It was about recognizing that community governance works best when it respects individual rights while promoting collective well-being. Our HOA isn't perfect, but we've created a model that balances these principles effectively. The $80,000 lawsuit that had seemed so dramatic at the time had ultimately been settled for $55,000, but its impact had been far greater than the monetary figure. It had sparked reforms that improved life for thousands of homeowners, created new legal protections, and transformed a toxic enforcement culture into a collaborative community approach. As I gavelled that first meeting to order, I couldn't help but think of the butterfly effect that had started with one cut cable. Sometimes, standing up against injustice creates ripples that extend far beyond our initial vision. My internet connection had been restored long ago, but the connections formed through this experience between neighbors, between communities, and between homeowners and their associations were the lasting legacy of that fateful day when the HOA cut my cable and unwittingly launched a revolution.